Welcome to Cars on Call. I am Steve Schutz, automotive journalist, I guess, Steve Schutz, and I'm here with automotive connoisseur, collector, Adams Hudson. Adams, before you say hi, we have a bunch of things to talk about. I have a little bit of a Shelby story. We're going to move on to the Volkswagen Scirocco. I have a car spotting that's close to home, and then you're going to talk about your trip to Europe, which included seeing the Ferrari factory.
Buongiorno, all the listeners.
Yeah, I was afraid you wouldn't be able to speak English.
Well, that means I'm non-lingual because I didn't speak Italian when I was over there. Did I hear you say you're going to do a Shelby story, and yet I noticed one of our notable Shelby fan co-hosts is not here?
He may not like this story, but it is an important Shelby story nevertheless. But we'll get to all of those topics, and I'm excited. So
It's so darned important. We're going to tell our listeners right now to like, subscribe, follow, tell all your friends, all your neighbors to include Cars on Call in your must listen, must watch car diet.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Adams. Like, listen, subscribe, all that. Let's say a quick word. Our intrepid trauma surgeon co-host Stefan Moran is out of the country. He's visiting Ireland, which is his ancestral home, but also his wife's ancestral home.
You know, I always put his ancestral home with that last name in France. What am I missing there? Who is that? His mother's home?
Yeah, his mom's side of the family is French, and then his father, Moran, that's an Irish name. So his father's side is from Ireland. We don't have to guess because we know when Stefan gets back, he will regale us with stories of not just his incredible trip, but also, I'm sure, his ancestral heroics.
Yes, and I think you chose the right word there. I feel like regale has got to be some sort of Irish ancestry.
It's an Irish word.
Nicely done.
Yeah. So I'm gonna mention something because I saw this on The Truth About Cars, which is a blog I really like, and or a website I really like. And I don't know if it was last week or week before, Adams, we talked about a $1.6 million vineyard green AC Cobra. And that was a harbinger of what is probably increasing prices. We did mention that we were sorry that you were not there to talk about it because obviously your collector knowledge is gigantic. But
and I saw the listenership drop off a cliff too. But go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's like, "Yeah, if Adams isn't there, what's the point?" So anyway, this is a Shelby car, and it actually is for sale, and you can buy it if you like. It went for, or it's going for, $1.8 thousand. So
wait, $1.8
thousand. Yeah.
Okay, that's a drop down from that other one that starts with an M.
$1.8 thousand for a 1988 Shelby Dodge Daytona Z. Here's my point.
Is there actually a point to talking about a Shelby Daytona Z? Okay.
Here is my point. And I think this needs to be said because there's been a lot of conversation on this show about the AC Cobras, a lot of the Shelby cars that are all going up in value, GT350s, GT500s, continuation models, that sort of thing. And it needs to be said, in the wake of that, plus the Ford versus Ferrari movie, it needs to be said that the legacy of Carroll Shelby, just like the legacy of Enzo Ferrari, is complicated. It's not as simple. He did have these Shelby Omni Dodge Shelbys, the GLH, the GLHS, and the Daytona. This Daytona, it's a front-wheel drive, 4-cylinder, 2.2-liter engine car. The performance on this was not good. Oh, by the way, the Shelby's performance was no better than the standard Dodge Daytona. These are not cars that anybody would be proud of, and that's evidenced, Adams, by the $1.8 thousand price. It's $1,800 for a Shelby.
I love the decimal point in there. That just gives it such panache. I admitted on this show, which is clear that I need some version of counseling, that I actually had a Shelby Omni, a GLH, and it was a desperate period in my life. But I did have something with a Shelby nameplate. But I tell you, that's a time period, and for all the Shelby aficionados out there, this is not being even remotely said in disrespect. But that was a time period where Shelby, his own self, was sort of flirting with not irrelevance, because he had the Cobra, he had the Mustangs, but man, there was a dark period where he wasn't really producing anything. The Shelby kit cars, as they were called back then, and now they're called all sorts of things, homages and reproductions and legacy cars. But I would have to assume that Mr. Shelby would have loved to have had an income based around automobiles. People may or may not know that he had barbecue cook-offs and stuff like that, that he was raising money doing that. He had all sorts of other interests, and he was like a serial entrepreneur before that was a phrase. But when Lee Iacocca approached him and said, "Hey, you put your name on a car or two or three, and we'll do something in the car business," at that time, small bore, high revving, decent output 4-cylinders were kind of a thing to be reckoned with. Look what Ford was doing with their Mustang. They had a SVO, with the 2.3 turbo motor, and that was just sort of a hot topic. And that's a fairly low mark in the Shelby history, but he had to do what he had to do. And I'm going to say it was probably a business case for him. They did not make very good cars at that time. All those little motors were based on and around the K car from Chrysler, which was a huge seller. It basically pulled Chrysler out of the depths of bankruptcy to have that little car and then move on to the minivan.
Yeah, I think it was at that point, Carroll Shelby was yesterday's news. And, girls got to make a living, and dude's got to do what he's got to do. And I think that he did it purely for the money. This is not a K car engine that he took back to his shop and worked on and made it something great. He just slapped his name on there. This was for money. And I think it needs to be said, and I'll say it quickly, Carroll Shelby, a great man, but his negative was that he was kind of a whore for money. And I think Enzo Ferrari, a great man, but there's almost no person in the automotive industry that he came in contact that he didn't make pissed off. Enzo Ferrari could not get along with people. He couldn't get along with his coworkers. He couldn't get along with his executives. He certainly couldn't get along with Henry Ford II. And Carroll Shelby just wanted money.
I think you're right. And there was a time, and now that we're sort of covering this, this is not like it's not findable somewhere on Google. And I remember it well. Carroll Shelby was involved in lawsuits
right
everywhere. If you uttered the word Shelby or Cobra in public, you were subject possible to some sort of character defamation or a trademark infringement. He had lawsuits going all over the place. Why the whole kit car industry did not get shut down as a result, I'll never fully understand. It's not worth going into in this podcast, because Porsche or Ferrari, like you mentioned, you try to make a reproduction, anything that they ever made, and you are going to get sued out of existence. But I don't know if Shelby had the rights to it or not. Nonetheless, there was a lot going on in the world at that time. And like you said it so eloquently, Mr. Shelby was yesterday's news, and he was desperate to do something. He did what he had to do. All people who are trying to keep a family with a roof over their heads, they'll do what they can do. And then he waltzed on into Oldsmobile.
GM.
Yeah, exactly. With the Aurora engined
Series 1.
Series 1. It was forever in gestation. The only car with a longer gestation period was probably the Lexus LFA. Has it
That's
come out
really
yet?
true. Yeah.
It's the LFA. Yeah.
LFA is on its way. So anyway, listen, we do not want to denigrate the name of Carroll Shelby. It's just worth pointing out. When I saw the Dodge Daytona Shelby Series Z or whatever it was actually Shelby Dodge Daytona Z. You know, we have to say something about this. Stefan, I hope you don't listen to this. And if you do, I hope you still come back on the show. So,
and please know,
anyway.
yeah, this is not to put down Shelby. This is mainly to irk some response from Stefan. That's the main reason we're saying it.
Yeah, we love the guy. All right, we're moving on. And I wanted to say a word because we've noted a few landmark anniversaries. And this year is 50 years since the Mark I Volkswagen Scirocco was launched. It was launched as a 1974 model, and they made the Mark I from 1974 through 1981. It was a very popular car, sold more than 500,000 units worldwide. I thought it was cool. I've never owned one. Adams, I don't know if you ever owned one, but what are your thoughts about this car? It's a cool old car.
It is a cool old car, and I did not ever own one. Although I would not be opposed even now. I wouldn't mind having a Scirocco or a GTI. But that was a car. You know, you mentioned sort of the yesterday's news thing. You think about Volkswagen during those years. You know, they had basically in the U.S. they had the Bug, they had the Carmen Ghia, which looked basically like a little boiled peanut and didn't sound much better, and the bus, and that was kind of what they had. And the Bug was an ancient design, even at that time. It was relatively ancient, and so they're out to change the world with a front engine, sort of the next version of Alex Isagonis' incredible design for the Mini, which is to take a front engine water cooled car and make it super compact, but make it kind of cool, a people mover, like the new people mover.
But I thought it was interesting, Adams. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I thought it was interesting that what Volkswagen did was they came out with the Golf, which I would say is absolutely a reply to the Mini. It is a new vehicle, a new way of making it, front wheel drive, front engine. Okay, but why that? I get why the Scirocco.
You know, it's funny you say it like that, because in my recollection, and it sounds like you're saying this, the Golf came out first and then the Scirocco.
Yeah.
Well, you know what Wikipedia says, and this was news to me, and we may have to look it up. And listeners, if you're out there,
I thought they were like simultaneous, is what I thought.
Well, what I read today, and it actually kind of made sense, is that they launched the Scirocco first. They had the Golf built, the Rabbit, the Golf built, and they had that platform. They had everything ready to go, and they put the Scirocco body on it first in order to flush out any sort of teething pains or problems that they may have had with the lower volume car before they came out with the bigger volume car. Now that may be debated, and listeners, viewers, please weigh in on that if you know differently. However, I mean, I think the cool thing, what they did is they got an Italian designer involved, and Giorgetto Giugiaro was tapped to make the design for both the Golf and the Scirocco. And so the Scirocco is this little two-door, kind of sporty looking version. I'd say sporty. I mean, I thought it was a very attractive design, and it has a very, like, if you take a look at it, and of course we're going to have graphics showing it, that the Scirocco, like if you took a piece of string and went right from the tail end above the tail lights and right to the front of the nose, it's almost a straight line. There's not a whole lot of adornment there.
Yeah.
It cants down ever so slightly, which was really, to me, sort of the beginning, the more or less the genesis of what we started calling the wedge design, which was incredibly influential. And some people say that the Golf was like the most influential design ever. Of course, that's highly debatable. I think the Mini would be in that running as well. But you know, the Scirocco was pretty slick looking, and it had a very also unadorned front end that had 4 headlights tucked into it instead of just 2. And I thought this was kind of interesting that at that time, when it launched, like Steve said, 73, 74, it was coming in vogue in Europe to have rectangular headlights, where in the US we still had round headlights. So, Giugiaro had to put round headlights in, but the US got a larger engine at that time than the Europeans did. So a lot of the Europeans, in a real turn of the tides, started putting the Americanized version headlights in their otherwise rectangular headlighted cars to make them look like the more powerful, bigger engine car. So we got a big whopping, maybe a 1.5 liter. They got a 1.1, 1.3. And it was tucked in and kind of neat looking. And Giugiaro, for those of you who may wonder, what is that mouthful of syllables? He designed the BMW M1, the Lotus Esprit. Later, he did the DeLorean DMC-12. And for this discussion, he also did the Maserati Ghibli. Wow, what a sexy landmark design that is.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, I mean, that really should be on anybody's top 10 most beautiful. And he did the Bora and the Merak, which was like the little brother to the Bora. And the reason I pick on those two is because they were named for winds, which is kind of a cool thing that they decided to do over in Maserativille. And the Scirocco is actually a wind. It's a wind that blows across the Mediterranean from Africa. It's a very dry, hot wind. And I wondered, is that so VW sort of adopts this wind naming thing. They have this Italian designer, Giugiaro, who's super hot in the day and designed a whole lot of cars, obviously. And if you look at the front end of that car, Steve, and I wonder if you agree, the front end of the Scirocco, with the tight little tucked in lines, the four headlights, the flat hood line and the grille treatment, to me looks a whole lot like a baby Lamborghini Espada.
Yeah. I totally agree. It's kind of funny because literally the only part of the car that looks like the Espada is is the front, but it's got the 4 round headlights and it's very vertical. So it does look like the Lamborghini Espada. I never actually thought about that, but it's true.
Well, and the way you can tell them apart is the Volkswagen will be the one of the two that's not on fire. Little tip.
That's funny. I think the Espada is one of those vehicles that it's great to look at. It's very attractive. It's got that the whole rear end is very attractive and very distinctive. But yeah, you never want to get into it because you can't get out. And you never want to drive it. You never want to drive it. It's so low to the ground. What I'd say about the Golf, my feeling at the time, and I remember when the Scirocco came out and was driving around, I remember thinking it looks different from, it was the Volkswagen Rabbit here. It looks different from the Rabbit, but it has the same engine, same transmission. So they're like, oh, this is a sportier car, but it's not sportier. It's not faster. It doesn't have more power. So even at the time, I thought that was kind of dumb. Now I think they should have turboed it or something, because I think it's kind of lame to have the same performance and one car is quote unquote sportier. But I think the design is really good looking. What I'd say about the Rabbit or the Golf is the reason I think it's a more influential design than the Mini is the Mini was just too soon. Nobody was ready for that. Yes, of course, it was great. It was very influential. It changed the world. But at the time, people were like, no, we don't want that. We want front engine, rear wheel drive. No, but people just were not ready for it. And I think, honestly, let's be honest, they made the Mini too damn small. So it's too low and too small. And people were just like, listen, this doesn't make any sense for my family. I'm not going to take this out and get hit by. And back then, there's no F-150s, but you had, like a Ford Consul, for example, which was a European Ford family vehicle that competed against the Mini, significantly larger and higher. So I think the Rabbit/Golf was more influential because it came out at a time when people were ready for it, and it wasn't too small like the Mini.
Man, that's a great point, because when you see a Mini, and, folks, we're not talking about the current Mini that is really almost like a Maxi compared to the original one. It is unbelievably tiny to see the original Mini. And, we're mentioning this because they're parallel heartbeats along the automotive development line. And the Mini, was trying to be all things to all people. And I think, Steve, you're exactly right. It was a little bit early. They sold 1 jillion of those things. but it was just too tight and too tiny. I mean, we're talking about what, 12 or 13-inch wheels, something that, looks more at home on maybe a lawnmower.
It's like a go-kart. Yeah.
Yeah,
And by the
yeah,
way, they sold a Jillian. Well, wasn't really a Jillian. I mean, yeah, again, you compare it to, the Ford Consul, which is the predecessor to the Escort. That outsold it. I haven't
yeah,
seen the numbers, but a lot of, all the, like a Fiat 128, 124,
yes.
a lot of these vehicles, and I can't think of their names, but they sold more because they actually made more sense to buyers at the time. And the Mini was just kind of fringy because, again, too small too soon.
Yep. Yep. And when we like circling back to the Scirocco really it was more stylish than the
Yes.
Golf Rabbit, and certainly more stylish than anything that we're talking about with the Mini. And it just had I don't know, it just sort of had a cool look to it. And that's when a sport coupe was kind of a thing to have. It was a little bit like, instead of I don't know, it was like a sport coat with no tie. It was just cool enough. And it was about a whole 85 horsepower. And I'm probably misquoting that, but it wasn't a lot. And they came out with a GTI version, but the GTI version of the Scirocco was nowhere near as popular as the one of the Golf, which really was sort of a landmark hot hatch. I mean, it sort of like birthed that whole hot hatch thing.
I'm glad you said that, because that is what it comes down to. I mean, it's like a woman will pick a pair of shoes because it's better looking than another pair. And the Scirocco did look cool. So I remember, again, I was a car guy at the time, just like you were. And I remember saying, on the one hand, it's lame that it has the same performance on a Golf. On the other hand, damn, that looks good. It's a good looking car, which is, every time I see one, which is not common, I'm like, damn, there's a Scirocco. So, okay, let's move on. But I guess Stefan would say Chateau Bas to the Scirocco.
I guess.
Yeah. Hey, so I want to talk about a car spotting, and this is a weird car spotting, Adams, because it's my wife's car. But something occurred to us, because we are, going to have to replace this car. It's almost 10 years old. And every time my wife looks at something, or I look at something that might be suitable, we think it's not as good. And this is a 2015 BMW 328D station wagon, all-wheel drive. We picked it up in Europe in 2014, and it's been a really good car. And here's the problem for my wife: she does not like going to the gas stations. I think most women don't. And this car with a diesel engine, it's a small, very efficient, and oh, by the way, clean 4-cylinder diesel engine, goes about 600, between 550 and 600 miles on a tank. And my wife, Elisa, does not want to get something else where all of a sudden you're going 300, 350, maybe 400. It's a lot less. And oh, by the way, she likes how it drives. And I like how it drives too. It's great on the open road. It reminds me of something that an engineer from Germany, and I don't know if this was Mercedes or BMW. It could have even been Audi, but it was a German engineer. And he said, what do people like about diesel engines? He said, torque and range. Well, that's what we love about this car. It's really a little bit too small. I think it sits too low. But any thoughts on that? The diesel, the wagon, I mean, but especially the diesel.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. And I don't know, I don't think you picked your car spotting based on what I'm going to reference later about my little European vacation. But I rented a diesel over there, which we'll talk about in a moment. And, torque and range, I think the guy nailed it exactly. And, they sort of fell out of favor in the US. And, especially when diesel became comparable or even slightly more expensive than what we call regular gasoline. But, that particular car, handsome as it is, during a bit of BMW's heyday, a very reliable engine, and the wagon. You never see the small wagons. You see them all over the place in Europe, but you just don't see them over here. And I think people have forgotten the basic utility of a decently sized wagon, not an SUV.
Yeah. it's really great. You got a hatch and you open the hatch and you can put stuff back there. And I like that you can open the window separately from the whole door, so you can just throw stuff in the back by opening the rear window, the backlight.
I didn't even realize that, because I've had a couple of the other wagons, the Volvo and the Mercedes and the Audi, none of which did that. That's kind of cool.
It's really cool. So we like that. Having said that, there's definitely times when we wish we had something larger, and I think my wife would like to get something larger. But again, this engine, which she almost never has to fill up with diesel fuel, she absolutely loved. Oh, by the way, I think that generation, which is the F30 generation of the 3 Series, I believe that is the best looking 3 Series there ever was.
I have to agree there. I mean, it had a very attractive, very taut silhouette. It didn't look like Stefan has mentioned a few times, and we keep referring to him as if we miss him. But
that's right. We don't.
He talks about the small, medium, and large of at least one other German automaker. And I think BMW sort of adopted that. But in those years, it didn't. I mean, the 3 Series looked distinctive and different, and you could pick it out on the road.
Yeah, absolutely right. The 7 Series looked kind of weird. The 5 Series looked really good, and the 3 Series looked great. So it's like we miss him. Yeah, we miss you, Stefan, of course. We love you. So anyway, yeah, it's to me, it's a reminder that the problem with BEVs is range, and that's going to continue to be a problem. That's a problem they're going to have to solve. And gas engines are pretty good with range, but boy, diesel engines were great with range. That's particularly true, oh, by the way, of large commercial trucks, and especially the semi trucks you see. And the idea that we're going to make those battery electric seems impossible to me. I think that's a long way off, just because of the weight of the batteries. But with diesel, these big semis can go forever on a tank of gas. It's a big tank, but they can go forever. And like I said, my wife is just reluctant to give up this car because of that, the torque, but especially the range.
Why do we have to give it up? Did I miss something in the beginning? Is it all related to size? It's not miles and unreliability, right?
Well, my wife is very happy with the car. The problem is that her husband does not like to sit on cars for too long. Her husband, I think, wants a new car. I think that's what it comes down to.
Did her husband?
I want to get a Cayenne.
Wife?
Want to get a Cayenne.
Well, then you drive the Cayenne.
Exactly. We're probably going to hold on to it for a little while. Like I said,
the truth comes out. This has turned into some sort of like marriage counseling session.
An encounter session. This is yeah. I feel like you should say like Fraser Crane, I'm listening. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being my therapist.
Is the caller there? Okay.
So with that, we're going to move on to your trip. So it's kind of funny that you and Stefan were over in Europe at exactly the same time.
Can we go back to the part where you don't listen to your wife? Okay, no, to the trip.
Thankfully, she doesn't listen to this show. So,
along with throngs of others.
Yeah. In her mind, I do listen to her.
Yeah.
So let's hear about this trip, because I want to start with I guess I'm going to say, what do you want to talk about? But I cannot wait to hear about the Ferrari.
You wouldn't listen anyway. Why do you even ask?
I'm still thinking about the Cayenne. All right. So I don't know if you mentioned you drove a diesel car. I guess let's start with that, because you drove around in this car. Talk about that, then we'll get to the Ferrari thing.
I tell you, when I was in Florence, Italy, as those of you may have sort of picked up, we had a 3-week vacation over there, and there was a period between Florence and the sort of the countryside of Tuscany, which, if you care to look it up on a map, is not really well traveled. There's not a lot of it's decently traveled, but there's not a lot of big cities in there. So I kind of had to and wanted to rent a car. So the travel agent put together a way that I could pick up a car in Florence and drive it that way. I ended up putting about 350 miles on it, but it was supposed to be, and I wouldn't have cared, how they do that, like you're going to get a blank car or its equivalent. And so it said a Mercedes E-Class or its equivalent, which I kind of didn't care. But I was pleasantly surprised when they wheeled around in a black Audi A5 S line.
Wow.
I felt instantly 10 years younger than I would have if they brought me the E-Class. Little demographic comment there, but it was a very good looking car. It was the lift back version, which is a super cool take on, and just a normal trunk that sort of like opens on itself. So it was lift back, and it had the diesel motor. I think it's a diesel turbo, about a 340 horse motor, and like you mentioned about your BMW 3 Series diesel, tons of torque. And once the torque sort of pops up to a certain amount, the turbo comes on and you kind of can feel it. I mean, it's not like the turbo lag of old, but once you feel like you're running out of steam, because diesels are typically sort of low revving motors, that turbo would come on and it would light up. I enjoyed that car tremendously. And if you think about an A5, folks, you think, okay, well, that's kind of a mid-size, sort of smaller car. Crazy as it sounds, it was about as big as anything you would want to drive in Europe.
Before you compare it to smaller cars, because it's a liftback, I assume that's the Sportback, the 4-door,
Yes.
4-door / 5-door.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say this. I drove behind the original A5, which is just a 2-door coupe, Series 1, and this was yesterday on the highway. And Adams, the first A5 came out about 15 years ago, maybe 18, but it was around 15 years ago. And I remember it looked really, really good at that time, but I liked that it was an understated design. I remember thinking, the A4 looks pretty good, but the A5 looks significantly better. That is a beautiful design. Adams, that design has aged very well. That car looks great today.
I totally agree with you. A good friend of mine who's got excellent taste. He's also a car guy, big car guy. He chased that version of S5 for about a year before he got one. And it's kind of the one that got away from him too. He had it about 2 years and sold it. But just that car just looks right. It looks as modern as any car today. Absolutely.
It's elegant. It's understated. It's everything we said about Audi a couple shows ago. It's a beautiful, beautiful car that's aged. So the complexity of car design cannot be overstated. It's very complicated because you can make a car looks beautiful from the front, doesn't look good from the back. You can make it look good from the back. It doesn't look good from the side. A5 looks good from any angle.
It totally does. It's very harmonious design. You just walk around that car and what you see is one continuous idea taken to an acceptable level everywhere. Like you said, it's not overdone in any one particular way, but that car in the rear 3/4 or front 3/4, that's kind of like the way you determine, is a car a good holding together design? And that particular one does. And I actually thought this particular A5 did. The S line comes with a little bit bigger wheels. It may or may not be lowered a little bit. It could have a little bit of fascia trim on it that makes it look sportier. But the car, even though it was a turbo diesel, actually behaved like a sporty car, and it looked like a sporty car, and it was fun on little twisty roads. And what's so odd, when you're over there, I mean, I'm no big European traveler. I hadn't been in Lord knows about 15 years. But when you're driving and you're doing what's indicated about 170 kilometers an hour, which looks odd on the speedometer to see that you're doing 170, and you get whistled by a big Mercedes sedan, or it may be some little crazy Peugeot you never heard of in your life that will go by you in the left lane, and heaven help you, you had better be out of the left lane if they're coming, because they will be in your trunk.
I wish it was like that here. So you're driving your A5 around, and you did mention to me previously before we started recording that you said there's a lot of like really tiny cars over there. I mean, I know there's some, but more, I guess in Germany, there's not as many of these little cars.
Oh, that's right. That would have been more your stomping ground, but no, there were just tiny cars everywhere. Little, Of course, the small Fiats, the smaller Alphas that we never saw over here, the newer ones that I didn't catch the numbers of, but also a lot of things we don't see, the Opals, the Renaults, the Peugeots. I mean, the little cars you sort of forget are even still manufactured. But there was also a decent Korean presence with the Hyundais and Kias, some Japanese stuff, almost no British stuff, but man, it is just small, because I was in Milan and Rome and Florence, which are very, very populated cities. And they whistled through those roundabouts. Nobody uses a blinker, and they move. It's almost like if you put floating leaves in a fast moving stream. That's what these cars move like. Miraculously, they don't hit each other and kill people all the time, but they just keep on moving.
Yeah, of course, you got to worry about the scooters too.
Oh,
I can only imagine what Stefan would have to say about the safety over there.
Well, if he doesn't have tire tracks over his back when he gets home, he will be one of the fortunate few, because I came so close to stepping. You have to step off a sidewalk every now and then to go by somebody, pedestrian, somebody with strollers or luggage. And you more than a couple times, step off a sidewalk and a little scooter would go 2 or 3 inches from me. And, they were nonplussed by it. They're just used to it. I was the one who was more like shocked.
Yeah, we don't have that here. Before we get more out of you, Stefan predicted you were going to come home with a car.
As close as I came to coming home with the car, I came home with this. This is
it's a Ferrari mug. I love it.
Exactly. And the ever discreet Ferrari shirt. I don't know if you can make that out.
You can barely see it. That's hilarious.
Yeah, two more payments, and both of these will be mine.
It is funny that people with Ferrari hats, the chance of someone with a Ferrari hat actually owning a Ferrari is very close to zero.
I think you're right, partly because of the cost of the hat, but no, I think you're right.
It's like a Duke shirt. Everyone's a Duke basketball fan, so if you see somebody with a Duke shirt, they almost never have any connection to Duke. My son Patrick, who went to Duke, he wears Duke stuff occasionally, and people said, "Do you go to Duke?" And he says, "Yes." He said, "They're always surprised."
Well, I guess the people who wear it are supporting them in their way. So
yeah, although he does look like a Duke student, so I guess they're not that surprised. But honestly, most people who wear a Duke shirt are not Duke fans, and I think it's 99.99% of people who wear Ferrari shirts not only don't own a Ferrari, have never been in a Ferrari.
I think that's probably the case. And I saw some of the 99.9s at the museum.
Yeah. So I want to talk about this because we talked about Stefan's ancestral home. Well, you owned one of the absolute classic Ferraris, the Dino, and you now go back to that ancestral home of the Dino. You went to the Ferrari factory, the museum. It must have been amazing.
Well, it was, and that when I got that Dino, which was on my first and only trip to Italy, exactly 40 years ago. So in 1983 is when I got that thing, and I've had a few since. Thankfully. I mean, the world of coincidence and other things have been fair to me on occasion, and had a few Ferrari since. But that particular
Go ahead and list them. So the first one was the Dino, and then
a 330 GTC front engine V12 car. And it may not be worth listing them all. I mean, there were about 6 or 7 308s and 328s.
All right. So okay, yeah. So the 330
sort of entry level stuff.
The 330, and then what else? You don't have to go through all of them, but the ones
several, maybe 3 308 carb cars, and then about 4 328, of course, injected cars, a 512 TR, a 512 BBI, and that's about it. I mean, maybe 8 or 9 or something in total.
The 512, the nomenclature, which I don't think works anymore, but that would be a 5-liter 12-cylinder engine, and the TR is Testarossa. So that is Don Johnson, right? And
Yep.
then the 512 BBI Berlinetta Boxer. You said something really interesting about that. I'm gonna circle back. You said that it was a better car than its contemporary, the Lamborghini Countach, and yet the Countach is worth a lot more money because it just looks cooler, like it's from another planet. But you must have loved that Berlinetta Boxer.
I did. That was a I don't know if you call it a halo car, a bucket list car, or whatever, but that was a car that I had really sort of had in my dreams. I thought, boy, one day, that would be great, because it was so much the big brother to the Dino that we're talking about now, like that I actually imported from Italy back in the day. The BBI was just like the grown up, super pumped, athletic version of the younger brother Dino, just because the Dino was a little 6-cylinder car, et cetera, and the BBI had the big 12, the bigger 12. But honestly, as far as fun to drive, the Dino was hands down more fun to drive.
Wow. I guess because of weight.
A lot the weight, and it just it's just the way stuff fits you. You get into something, you click the door shut, and everything falls readily to hand. I have to say that the BBI felt like, and heaven help me, I've just been to the Ferrari factory, so I feel like I'm insulting the church of Ferrari here. But the BBI, even though it was sort of like Enzo's, not exactly a swan song car, but it was a car that I think Pininfarina called later his favorite car design from Ferrari, and it was exotic as all get out. But truthfully, that car was not that well screwed together. It just had, it had fiberglass and aluminum and metal, and it was trying to be bonded together, and the frame was a little bit squirrely. That was a car that was never officially imported into the US at all. Mainly because Ferrari, like you said, being the likable dude that he is, said, I'm not selling this to those stupid Americans, or however he sort of decided not to export it. So any Boxer you see in the US is a gray market car.
I remember I've always liked the design of the Boxer. I like the cars that are understated. One of my favorite Ferraris, by the way, is the 308 GT4, which is
Interesting.
Bertoni design. It's a 2+2. I've always liked that. I liked it much more than the 308 GTB or GTS. And
Wow.
I've always liked the GT4 because I liked that it's understated. I've always liked the 412 understated. So for that reason, I like the Berlinetta Boxer. And I remember following prices, and in the 90s, you can get a good one for about 75 or 80 grand.
Man, you have obviously been following this. I did not realize you had that in your past, but that's exactly right. Yeah, and that, the fact that you like the GT4, you were in the vast minority for a long time, but now I think fashion's catching up with you, Steve. I think a lot of people are now looking at that going, whoa, that was different, and it is a little bit more spacious. And I think people who've driven the GT4 versus the 308 will say that the GT4 out handles it because it has better weight distribution, much like the BMW M3 Roadster, M3 Coupe.
Yeah, I just think it looks more understated, and I think it's a more mature design. The 308 seems kind of cartoonish. The GTB or the GTS, and the Berlinetta Boxer again is also a kind of a restrained design. But now, of course, they're all value. Everything's valuable. Everything's going up. Ferrari's crazy, and so you went to the factory and you went to the museum.
Yes,
I mean,
indeed.
I guess I don't know which one you want to start with, but let's talk about that.
Well, I'll just say, there's actually two museums. There's one in Maranello, which is where I went. There's one in Modena, which is sort of the ancestral home of Enzo. And the differences between the two are sort of subtle. The one that's in Modena is more about the history and Enzo Ferrari's beginnings with the company. They've sort of got his office recreated and all this stuff. And the one that I went to in Maranello is a very modern, very slick, very nicely done museum. I cannot tell you how beautifully, I mean, as you would expect, it's in Italy, and it's the shrine of Ferrari, and it's just really handsome and very well done. And we had a private tour with the girl there who was incredibly well versed in the Ferrari lore. But if you go, you do not need a private guide. I mean, you can go through it, you can read the placards, you can listen to the audio. There is the first thing you see, and I won't take it through every single step, but the very first thing you see is a 250 LM in the raw
Oh,
aluminum.
wow.
Oh my gosh, man. And then there's the one that's in the racing livery right next to it. So you sort of see, well, these people really do bang out their cars, on wooden bucks. And, that's how they built them back then. And then here's the racing version and just the dedication that took to get from point A to B. And then you see like the modern supercars, or what I would call the modern ones, starting with maybe the 288 GTO and F40, F50. And, the Ferrari people who know these numbers and stuff by heart, they're not going to be surprised that those are there. But if you don't, I mean, it really is an interesting sort of, it's like taking a pinprick to the DNA of what Ferrari is. And they would produce a sort of a bigger seller car if they ever had a big seller before they came out with maybe the 360. But then they would have a sort of a moderate seller car that might be for a family. And then they would have this elevated version of a car that only a handful of people would want. And they would ask crazy money for it, and they would sell every blooming one they made. And Enzo's thing, or the marketing department, I give Enzo credit, but they would somehow come up with the number of how many people wanted their elevated car. And Steve, you already know this, I can see you nodding, but if they thought 500 people in the world would want this car and pay for it, they would make 499. They just had a thing about always having a demand that outstripped supply. And it has done a lot for the Ferrari brand and image just around the world, because, the unobtainable is the thing people want the most. So anyway, the museum shows you all the models through the years, some of it graphically, some of it just, with that car sitting there on the floor. They had a 430 Scuderia. They had a few of the race cars from the FXX series, which is a series I basically do not understand, but they had some of those.
I don't either. You buy the car and you can't, they keep it, and then they ship it to a track with a bunch of dudes, and you get to drive it at the track, and then you pay for that. And then they take it back. They're like, yeah, we'll let you know when the next event is.
And
you don't own your car, really, right? You don't own it.
And what are you competing for? I do not understand.
You're not competing for anything. You need to take some hot laps, you get some pasta, and that's it.
And you can't drive it on the street. You can't even make it street legal. I mean, anyway, so they had some of those. They had some motors. They had, oh wow, like if you're into racing, which I have to say that I'm not super versed on, but they had an entire F1 room that just had like from left to right, and it's so creatively displayed. It's not just cars sitting on the floor on all four wheels. They're like lifted ups where you can sort of see the over, like the bird's eye view, the plan view of the car. And then you'd hear voiceovers, from Niki Lauda or Schechter or Schumacher, people talking about, their time with Ferrari. And it's just very moving. I mean, it's really it's a wonderful place to go. And the girl who did our tour guide, I'll give one little aside, one little story. She's probably, I'm guessing, probably late 20s or something. And she pops off. She knows facts, figures, the dates, how many they made, etc. I mean, she is really into it. And I am not quizzing her to try to find out. I am just an inquisitive sort of person. So I'm asking her some questions about stuff. She knew the answer every time, unhesitatingly, not like, oh, let me look that up or whatever. And I said, excuse me. I said, if you don't mind my asking, I said, are you like a Ferrari fan? Like, have you been a Ferrari fan, or did you learn all this because of this job? Was it sort of like in the audition or the training or the education to have this job? And she said, well, actually, and she sort of turns on her heel. She looks over to the right and she goes, actually, I grew up about 6 kilometers that way. And she
Wow.
over and she said, when I was a child and I could not sleep, and I would wake up in the night and my dad and mom did not want me waking up the rest of the people in the house, my dad would take me outside and sort of in his arms and walk me around. She said, I could hear them testing the cars at Fiorano at night. She said, I've been around for, yeah.
That's amazing. Oh, by the way, so this girl who grew up in that area and grew up listening to those engines, and she's explaining all that knowledge to you, it's her second language.
Yes. Oh, exactly. Yes. For real. I mean, yeah, she knew it, you know, backwards and forwards. And it was fun to be with her, and it was fun to go through the place. Then they take you to the, I think they call it the atelier room, which would be like in Porsche speak, it would be the special wishes room, where you can get special paint, special interior, special steering wheels, special whatever it is you want. One guy had a car that had just been made, and it was sitting there. I don't know if it had even been delivered yet. A guy from Hong Kong who had the entire carbon fiber body made to his personal taste.
Wow.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Wow. Yeah, and she dropped on me that of all the colors in the rainbow that you can get a Ferrari in, there is exactly one color they have never painted a car and never will paint a car.
What is it? I can't imagine.
You know, if you thought about it, you'd come up with it. I guessed a couple or three, and I was wrong. It's
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say gold, but I think I've seen a gold Ferrari. So
I'll give you a hint. The least manly color you could come up with for
pink?
a car. That's the one.
I'll be darned.
Can't get a pink one.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'll say this, you know, I don't really want a Ferrari. I have mixed emotions about Ferraris. My favorite supercar of all time, and Stefan and I have talked about this, is a 288 GTO. So that's a car I absolutely I loved it when it came out. Again, understated. It looks like a 328, and it doesn't share a single body panel with a 328. It just looks like it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of Ferraris I really, really admire. The 458 is a recent Ferrari that I just absolutely can't get enough of. Everything about that car I love. So, you know, then of course the mixed things I was talking about, the complicated legacy of Enzo himself, just irritating and driving away so many good people. However, if I were to win the lottery and they were to say, okay, you have $500 million, one of the cars I would buy would be a Ferrari.
And would it be a 288 GTO that's sort of like a piece to admire and look at and take out like twice a year, or would it be a car you would drive around like a 458?
Both. I would get the 288.
I guess with 500 million, who cares?
Right. I get the 288 GTO, and I would get you know, the mod, probably the F8. It's a V8 and it's modern. It is, and as soon as I said that, I'm like, no, I'd probably get the Dino, the new Dino, the 296 V6 hybrid.
Yep. Well, I'll say one thing about that 288 GTO, and if we need to move on, that's understood. But the 288 was sitting in there, and this girl again, who, you know, like just knew all that what Ferrari was. She mentioned that, and from her reference point, she said, "Yeah, the 288 when it came." She goes, "This is what is typically regarded as the world's first supercar." And I had to and sort of bite my lip a little bit, but you know, that's. I know. I agree. That's what they're steeped in, but that's what they live. And again, it is the shrine. It is worth seeing. And they have a gift shop that is also worth seeing. I mean, it's got all the stuff you would imagine that they would have, you know, the shoes and the jackets and the watches and stuff. But, you know, there's a lot of things in there. And if you don't buy anything, they have Italian vacuum cleaners that will go inside your pockets and suck out whatever you got. And then you leave.
Whatever money you have.
Whatever money you got. They might shake you upside down if that doesn't work. But it worked on me. They did not have to pull out the vacuum cleaners, but it was a fun experience.
Like a shrine, right? Ancestral home. It was like a shrine.
Totally like a shrine. And the factory's in the distance. I mean, you can look out there and you can see the factory, but it is like Fort Knox of security, because it is the factory doors, if they're under 300 yards away from the barbed wire fence, I'd be surprised.
It's I guess maybe a cathedral rather than
a shrine.
So yeah. All right. Well, we're out of time, but what an amazing experience. And of course, when Stefan comes back, and Stefan, we miss you. When Stefan gets back, he's going to talk about his experience. And I know he was in Ireland, but I assume other parts of the United Kingdom. So we'll hear more about that. So,
well, maybe when we're all together, we can pool our resources and buy that $1,800 Shelby together.
1.8 thousand.
That's right. Sorry, I lowered its price. You can see it could have depreciated during.
It's worth 1.800. It's a terrible car. So anyway, with that, Adams, we will say goodbye.
And indeed, thank you so much for tuning in, folks. And remember, like, subscribe, follow, tell your friends, your neighbors, all your children, anybody you know to be part of this podcast.